Good evening, and welcome to Copperfield's Books virtual event with Barbara Graham in conversation with Lee Kravitz. My name's Jamie. I'm the Director of Events at Copperfields, and I'll be your host for the evening. Just a couple notes before we dive in. If you pop open your chat box, I will be sharing links to buy tonight's title, discount codes, previous works, websites, all the goodies tonight. And for any questions or comments that you have for tonight's speakers, go ahead and submit them under the Q&A icon, which is right on the bottom right of your screen. It makes it so much easier to see them. And now I'd like to introduce tonight's authors. Barbara Graham is an author, essayist, and playwright. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Eye of My Heart, the national bestseller, Women Who Run with Poodles, and Camp Paradox, a memoir. Her plays have been produced off-Broadway at the WPA Theater in New York and at theaters around the country. In conversation with her is Lee Kravitz. Lee is the author of acclaimed nonfiction, including Strange Contagion and Super Survivors, and he lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife and 2 children. Now they're here with us tonight to discuss Barbara's brand new title, What Jonah Knew, and I'm so thrilled to hand it over to you, Lee. Get us started.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So welcome everybody. Thank you, Copperfield Books. Hello, Barbara. Good
Hi. Yes, thank you so much, Copperfields. We love Copperfields. I live in the North Bay and Copperfields is a go-to. So thank you.
It's
And
wonderful.
please support your independent bookstores, Copperfields. Yes.
Bring on the Copperfield, bring on indies. Love it.
Right.
When you and I were talking when we were first getting to know each other, I told you I used to work in book publicity, and I used to have a list of all the independent bookstores that I used to send my authors to, and every time I'd go, I'd get a T-shirt that from these independent booksellers. So for the longest time, I wasn't paid very much, but I got really nice T-shirts. So you got to always support the indies.
Got a collection.
Totally. This is great. So I'm looking through here at the chat. Oh, there's somebody from the Highlands, the San Mateo Highlands. That's awesome. I'm from there as well. I'm selling my house. So if you know anybody who's looking for a house in the Highlands, let me know, reach out. And it's wonderful. Oakland. Okay, this is great. So we have a lot of people coming in. If there's questions, we're going to have time to answer questions from the audience toward the end of our meeting, our event tonight. Go to the Q&A button and feel free to put in some questions there. I'll look at those, but I can also look at the chat as well. But before we do anything, I think that we should have a toast because this is your first event, right?
It's my first public event. The book was launched on Tuesday. The way they talk about launches these days, I felt like I was being shot out of a rocket or something, but it's thrilling. Yeah. Tuesday, and it's now out in the world.
It's wild. Oh yeah. What does it feel like? I mean, it's, they always say like, do you feel changed at all? Like Tuesday, Monday night, you went to bed, Tuesday, you woke up, it was out. Does it feel different? Do you feel different?
I feel great. I feel it's been a kind of wonderful week. All kinds of lovely things have happened. I've connected with all kinds of people. I saw that Jane Oppenheimer is here. Jane and I connected this week. She read the audio version of the book so beautifully. I've actually been getting comments on Amazon or Goodreads about how wonderful the audio is. So
I love it. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool to be like one day you wake up and there's an audio version of your book out
There's an audio version, and today apparently People Magazine discovered it. So that's kind of trippy.
That is really, really trippy. That is amazing. Yeah. You could go to the supermarket right now and open up a People Magazine, and there you would be.
Probably next week. I think they went online today, and they're out next week. But yeah, but what we were saying before is how incredibly generous other authors and friends and people are. I feel really supported in such a beautiful way. I'm just grateful. I'm having fun. It's a ride.
I'm loving it. You're just getting started. So I think we should toast to you. We should start by having a toast to you.
Okay.
I have Chateau Saint Jean or Jean
Uh-huh.
here.
And I have something that my husband bought, but I don't know what it is. But I know I like it.
Vino. Cheers to you.
Cheers to
Toast,
you.
toast, toast, toast.
Okay. Thank you, Lee. Thank you for.
Oh, this is just the beginning of some wonderful times. So, I thought what might be fun, just for the first few minutes, to give people sort of a flavor of this book, which, by the way, What Jonah Knew is such an interesting novel. It was, I didn't know what to expect when I read it. And it just continued to sort of subvert expectations in the most wonderful way. And it takes your sort of typical thriller and comes about it in this unique sort of roundabout way as well. So we'll talk all about the philosophy of all and everything we talked to about, without giving plot points away really. But I thought just to kind of get into the voice of two of the characters, you could read us two short passages just sort of in the beginning.
Okay. So the book is told largely through the voices of two mothers, Helen and Lucie. And I'm going to start with Helen, and this is the very beginning of chapter 1. Helen Bird wasn't in the habit of breaking the law, but the heartless creep in the motel office left her no choice. She had to find her son. She had to see for herself if Henry had left something behind, some subtle trace of himself that no one else would notice but would point her maternal compass in the right direction. He'd never been out of touch before, not like this, not when he was expected home 2 days ago, and especially now when his girlfriend Mira was due to give birth in a matter of weeks. Luckily, the window in his motel room was open a crack, and Helen was able to jimmy it just enough to squeeze through. If the creep who refused to give her the key happened to see her and called the cops, so be it. In a way, she wouldn't mind. Maybe Saratoga Springs' finest would show more concern than the smug detective in Aurora Falls, who tried to convince her that Henry's disappearance was voluntary. Helen knew better, didn't she? So that's Helen at the very opening of the book. And so the next passage I'll read is Lucie, Jonah's mother. Jonah is not even conceived at the beginning of the book. And this is shortly after he was born, and they're on their tiny postage stamp terrace on the Upper West Side in New York where they live. And they're having like a ceremonial moment, and toasting Jonah's birth. It was a hard birth, and there an emergency C-section. And so Lucie, who grew up in Point Reyes and has a bit of the West Marin in her, she decides her husband is exhausted, wants to go to bed, but she sort of stops him and says, "This might seem weird, but whatever." Lucie closed her eyes and placed a hand over her heart. "I pray to Great Spirit, the spirit of Nana, and all the benevolent forces in the universe, that Jonah grows up happy, healthy, and safe, and stays that way until he's a very old man," she intoned in her best witchy voice. Then, clutching her still raw wound with one hand, she leaned forward and with the other waved the trowel over the hypericum like a magic wand. "I pray he's free from pain and suffering and never gets a serious illness or is in an accident in the air, on land, or sea." She paused for a moment, then added, "or in space, on the off chance he decides to become an astronaut. I pray he's never kidnapped or attacked or hurt for any reason, including war, random violence, or being the target of a hate crime, and that he knows love all his life. I pray he's never caught in a fire, a flood, an earthquake, a tornado, a hurricane, a tsunami, a volcanic eruption. Am I missing anything?" "I think you nailed it, Luce," Matt said, yawning. "Except maybe being crushed by a falling meteor, but what are the chances of that?" "Okay, good. No getting crushed by falling meteors either." Lucie took a few minutes to silently review the catalog of potential catastrophes until she felt certain that all the bases were covered. Then she spat twice over her left shoulder as Jonah began to howl.
Oh, ominous. What's amazing to me is, I mean, Jonah, even as an infant, seems like he's not all he seems to be in front of us. And before it occurs to me, maybe we should have you sort of explain just the premise of the book a little bit, because we're not going to go into too much spoiler territory, but it's super important
Right.
to sort of dive into what this book's about and how you came about the premise. I thought maybe you could sort of in your own words explain to everybody.
Sure. So it's about Helen, who is a single mother. She's a baker who lives in Aurora Falls, which is kind of like an imaginary Woodstock in upstate New York. And Lucie and Matt. And so Helen's son, Henry, has disappeared, and she's desperate to find Henry. Lucie and Matt happen to be in Aurora Falls. They live in Manhattan. Lucie's a health editor, Matt's a ophthalmologist, but they're up there that weekend and she happens to get pregnant. So fast forward, and so you heard the scene the beginning where Helen is desperately trying to find Henry. He's just disappeared, and Lucie is fresh from a very difficult birth with Jonah. And the lives of these two families will overlap. The premise is Jonah is kind of an anxious kid. He's shows signs of he's phobic about loud noises. He's an anxious little boy. Lucie and Matt have, of course, done everything to create the most, loving, supportive environment for this child. And so there are various theories as to why Jonah is as anxious as he is. And when he's about 4, he starts saying some weird stuff like, he asked Lucie, like, do you know my other mom? I have another mom. Things like that. And he talks about living in a yellow house and that was his house. And Lucie and Matt sort of chalk it up to, and just he's a very imaginative kid also. He's a very winning child with a great fertile imagination. But the anxiety and all these strange statements remain questions. Lucie is convinced, because Lucie lost family in the Holocaust, that Jonah's anxiety is a matter of ancestral trauma that has been inherited from her relatives through her grandmother who were killed at Auschwitz. So the book brings in questions of ancestral trauma. What's the source of that? How does that work? Epigenetics, as well as research in children who have spontaneous recall of a previous life. And so, and that research has been done, it's ongoing, was initiated by a psychiatrist by the name of Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia, Medical School, and conducted over many, many decades, many, many cases of these kids who start speaking about saying they remember another life, usually when they're between 2 and 4.
Well, I think that that's a really good place for us to sort of launch from this whole idea of inherited and remembered trauma, epigenetics and the psychology of that. And you and I were talking, you had said to me at one point that if you had never become a novelist, that you would have gone into psychology.
Yeah, I would have. Every few years when I got sort of fed up with being a writer, I would send away for catalogs to get my, MSW. So I could be a therapist, and Lee is a therapist as well as an incredible author of The Last Temptations, The Last Confessions, oh my God, of Sylvia P. Sorry,
No,
The
The
Last Temptations of Christ, but
I
not
wish I
really.
had been that one.
Yeah, well, Anyway, so
Yeah.
yeah, I was very drawn to psychology. I've had a lot of therapy, but I also, as a journalist, wrote a great deal about psychology and health and memory and trauma. So it was always kind of in my wheelhouse of interest.
That is amazing. So, let's talk about this particular story then. I mean, I know, you used to, actually, I want you to kind of tell us as well, but tell us how you came upon this story. Like, where did this come
Okay.
from?
Okay. So many years ago, mid 90s, I'm living in New York, writing for various magazines. I got an assignment from Self Magazine to do a story on past life regression therapy. It's actually sort of a funny story. I went to a workshop on the Upper West Side, laid on a mat. It was very cold in this workshop, got hypnotized by the therapist. People around me, right and left, were having all kinds of intense experiences. Somebody was Joan of Arc, somebody was, I don't know, throwing up. They were, I had absolutely zero. I just wanted to get out of there. I felt like I was in a production of Marat Sade. But anyway, but as part of my research, because I had to write the story, I did book a session privately with the therapist who had led the workshop and had quite a powerful experience, actually. And sort of, I went in there saying, okay, I will be your first failure at hypnosis. But I found myself remembering, seeing, fantasizing, I didn't know what it was, a horrific scene during the Holocaust, in which I was murdered. So I was left reeling from that, didn't know what to make of it. Truly, I was a journalist. Where were the facts? Um, After that, I saw my own therapist who handed me a book by Ian Stevenson, the person I've just been telling you about. And it was called 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. And it was one of his earlier books. He had many since then, but I was pretty blown away by the research. And at the same time, I was studying Buddhist meditation, going to hear a lot of Tibetan masters talking, including the Dalai Lama. They talk about past and future lives like last Thanksgiving and, next Christmas. And so all of these things, these three sort of streams kind of came together in my head, walking down the street in New York in a kind of download.
Wow.
And I had the story, or I knew where the story went. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I had the general sense of the
So
story.
when you actually went in to see this psychologist who did this, do you think that you had past life regression? Was that an experience you think you had, or how did you interpret that?
I I don't think there's a way really to know. Um, we can guess. That's why this research I found so compelling. I had always been kind of obsessed with the Nazis. I read every, The Last of the Just, Treblinka, Elie Wiesel, everything I could get my hands on as pretty young, as 12, 13, 14. I think I had dreams, but there's no way to be clear about what that was. Perhaps, and perhaps not. But the research was another thing.
So Stevenson's research on kids with past life regression. I mean, like, does he talk a lot about? I mean, how common is this with kids who sort of? And what we're talking about here, I guess we should just sort of explain it to everybody who's listening. Past life regression, for children is like children who believe, who say these sort of things, sort of like Jonah does. The yellow house I lived in, the dog that I had. And even in Jonah's case, he has a birthmark that is sort of, indicative of something that happened in his past. What does Stevenson really talk about with this sort of stuff?
Most of the kids they've followed, and they, try to find evidence and sort of follow what they say, but they begin speaking about these other lives generally between the time they're 2 and 4. And they talk about, they know names, they know places, they have all kinds of detailed information that they really have no earthly way of knowing whatsoever. And what's very striking about it, and I'll get to the birthmark question, is most of them recall the manner of their death. In the vast majority of the cases, how they died was sudden, violent, traumatic. Many of them have phobias associated with how they say they died. So, for example, if a kid is terrified of drowning, who said they, are terrified of taking a bath or going in a pool, a kid who said, he had drowned in a previous life, that's, there's an association. And very often, and Stevenson has a whole book on these birthmarks, some of these kids actually have a raised birthmark exactly where the wound, if they were shot by a gun, if they were knifed, whatever, where the wound was. And they even followed some of them with autopsies of the deceased. So it sounds crazy, woo-woo
But
out there, but
when we read your book, it doesn't read like that at all. In fact, it
yeah.
reads, it's an element of the thriller, which is not some, it is a thriller, but it's not. It's a mystery that sort of is told through past and present. And you really sort of beautifully sort of merge the research and the science with total fiction, in terms of the process, of what we read with the novel itself. I mean, actually, I want to go have one more question about this, because I was actually thinking about this as we were talking last time while we were prepping about this. What do scientists other than Stevenson, how do they interpret this? Do they think that the science is real? Do they think it's sort of bunk science?
I would say, I would hazard to say quantum physicists wouldn't be dismissing it so quickly. But I'm going to answer that with a quote from Stevenson, because he says it better than I do. So he was interviewed in 1999 by the New York Times and asked about what you just asked me. And he said, science develops ideas of what is so, and it becomes very difficult to force scientists to take a look at new data that may challenge existing concepts.
Yeah.
I'm not trying in any way to replace what we know about genetics or environmental influences. All I'm offering is that past lives may contribute a third factor that may fill in some of the gaps in our knowledge.
Just beautiful. I think it's one of there's space for everything is what we're saying. There's space for it. Did you this is totally different. Do you remember seeing that Albert Brooks movie,
Defending Your Life? Yeah.
I remember this movie comes out and there's this beautiful scene, this great scene where Meryl Streep, basically they can, Meryl Streep and Albert Brooks both die. They meet up in heaven, or the sort of midway between heaven and possibly going back to earth if you didn't learn what you were supposed to learn. And there's this scene where they get to see their past lives, who they were in their past lives. And Meryl Streep comes in, sits down, and she's looking at this visualization of who she was. And she was someone who was rescuing children from fires and was this sort of Mother Teresa character. And Albert Brooks is this scared guy running away from everything, from being attacked. Yeah, but I think you sort of, you come at the past life sort of storyline in a much more grounded way, which is something, I think that, the science, you spend large amounts of the chapters of this book really sort of showing us and, through research, what this is really all about, which is wonderful. This is very different than your past stuff. You've done plays, you've done, nonfiction. Let's talk a little bit about your process here. How is this different versus writing plays or even the nonfiction?
Well, very, very different in both ways. The difference in writing plays, I'd actually started writing a novel in many years ago but I was working at a theater company in San Francisco. They had an opening for a slot for a one-act play. So I turned my, what was very autobiographical beginning of a novel into a one-woman show, which I directed and one of the actors performed in. And so from that point on, I kept writing plays. But I have to say, the novel longing was always there, always there. And the thing about writing plays is, in a way, it's like music. You're scoring for actors, and the actors become equal the description in a novel, the setting, the lights, the sound, all of that, and their bodies and all the stuff that you get to write, the actors become. So I really felt frustrated at a certain point because I wanted to do the interior mind
Right.
of my characters, and I couldn't do that. I could score, I could give them their dialogue and write stage directions, and that was it. So very different. The thing about nonfiction and writing fiction and I'll talk mostly about memoir because in recent years I wrote mostly memoir and a lot of personal essays. You're confined. You're confined by the facts of your own life and your own experience, or the people you're writing about. And facts are very limiting in a certain way. Jessamine West said, fiction reveals truths that facts or that reality obscures. And I really find that to be true. With writing a novel, it's like carte blanche. You create the world, you create the people, interior, exterior, the whole thing. It has to have a logic and an integrity to it, but it's your creation and you can go where you want. And the freedom is incredible.
It is, right? I think about this a lot too. On the one hand, you have this incredible freedom. On the other hand, it's this huge sort of weight to carry because you have to do it all. So it's sort of, but you manage it so well. I mean,
So do you, Lee. So do
well,
you.
thank you, but I'll tell you, like it's in very much a master class reading your novel about, it's not just what the character does or thinks or says, but it's the subtext of the world around them. And you talk a lot. You write actually in your plays as well as in this book. You write a lot about motherhood, which fiction, nonfiction, memoir. Motherhood is this universal theme. You really tap into something really primal, particularly in this book. And I was thinking maybe we should talk a little bit about what keeps drawing this subject matter.
Yeah, I've written about motherhood in many different forms. For me, being a mother has been the most profound experience of my life, the most wonderful, the most terrifying. Somebody said that when you have a child, forever your heart is going to be walking around outside your body. And as your child gets older, you release that child into the world, you pray and hope for the best. But so it's a razor's edge of balancing this fierce love with fear. It's love and fear, and it's the most amazing journey to watch your children grow up and have children of their own, as my own son does. And so I'm the mother of a son. So I think we write about what we care about and what we love in whatever form it comes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In this, you play with motherhood. I mean, and I'm not giving anything away, at least I'm going to try not to. We have to sort of tread lightly here, but there is sort of this, you play with motherhood, the idea that if Jonah really is the reincarnation of somebody else, does he have more than one mother? And what does that do for the mother who gave birth to the child versus the mother who lost their child? And so there's some really interesting dynamics at play, and that's sort of the subtext that I was sort of talking about. It's, you've got people who are all supporting this little boy, but there's some sadness about the whole thing as well.
Well, if this were to be the case, neither of them, Lucie, who so identifies as Jonah as her child, who came into this world through her body, and he is hers and Matt's. Whereas Helen, should Jonah's memories truly be reflecting some of Henry's experience, then it's not like she's getting her son back if that were the case. So in a way, they both lose something, they both gain something else. But it's all very mystical, and nobody knows how anything really
Yeah,
happens. I mean, the book on a certain level is really about consciousness, to be really highfalutin about it.
it is. I think
I
it's
mean, I didn't set out to write it that way, but it kind of turned out like that.
you're talking about, of course it's about consciousness. It's about, what we remember and who we are, and who we might have been, and what that means for us going forward. Of course it's about consciousness. I remember reading when I was young a book by Brian Weiss, I believe his name.
Many Lives, Many Masters.
Exactly. And that was sort of the first book that I ever read that sort of, he's a psychologist, I believe.
Psychiatrist. Yeah, he was at the University of Miami.
Psychiatrist. Thank you. I mean, it's been a long time, but I remember basically it's a memoir about his experience with a particular patient who comes in.
Right.
He basically says, she has all these phobias, and then he has her regress to her childhood, and then he goes, go to this. He says, while she's under hypnosis, go to the source of your anxiety, your stress, your trauma, and she winds up going back many, many lives. And it's all about consciousness, and once we sort of bring up all these sorts of things, it helps define us in certain ways.
Yeah. Stevenson would say, and Stevenson kind of poo-pooed hypnotic regression because he felt that influences would come in from the current lifetime in adults. Not that it might not have some merit, but in terms of being a scientist and being a researcher, he was much more focused on these kids who, unprompted, suddenly start talking about this stuff that, seems to come out of nowhere. So
that is just absolutely fascinating. It's great stuff for a novel, which is what you've done. You've taken the hard science and turned it into something that's entertaining and wonderful and moving. I have to ask you, what are your personal beliefs? What do you believe?
I have always had the sense that life is more vast than what might be explained by our conventional material, or the conventional materialist view of the world, in which life is bookended by birth and death. So I've always felt that there's something more. But what I find really interesting as I think about this, and especially as I think about it right now, in a way, whether we've lived before and whether we're going to live again in the future matters less. But if you take the long view of things, then how we live now really matters. How we treat one another, how we treat animals, how we treat the planet, that matters. And so in a way, the other stuff you can speculate, but there's no speculation with this.
I think that's true. It's the power of now, but we're really literally talking our lives right now. I think that really matters the most. I love that. So we just don't know, but now is what matters most. And it's all about, I know Brian Weiss talks about this, and certainly I'm sure Stevenson does, I would assume, but it's all about what we're learning in the moment, what we carry with us. It's about knowledge. And again, back to the consciousness idea, right? What we hold on to. So one of the things that you and I share, other than an interest in this, is we share an editor.
Yeah, we do.
We do. So my editor at Harper and your editor at Harper are Gail Winston. She's wonderful. I was sort of curious, like, let's talk about your editorial experience. I can only let's compare stars and notes a little bit here. What was it like for you to have Gail sort of, get your manuscript and go, oh my God, Gail, oh my God, Barbara, I love this. Now let's rip it apart, or maybe not. Maybe she loved it and didn't touch a
She,
word.
yeah, she read it in one night. Gail and I had worked together before. She was the editor on Eye of My Heart. So
Yeah.
we had history. She read it in one night, loved the book. I think probably the way in for her was the motherhood piece. She's the mother of two sons. Um, and she didn't, she was very judicious in her editing. She there was trimming. There was very little editing or of language or some very wise trimming and suggested trimming, but she's not a tough editor. And actually, I sold the book last June. I had to deliver, she made her notes, and I had to deliver the final manuscript in September. Her edits were done. So it was really quick. She didn't do major. What about you?
Honestly, I felt the same way. It was almost my agent was the one who did most of the editing up until we were ready to just sort of go out. Gail I totally agree. She's one of these editors that just is very surgical in her edits. When I got it, she just tightened and made slight
Yeah.
suggestions, and she just, I've known editors who are the opposite, who want to put their stamp and their voice and their fingerprints all over a manuscript and make it their
No.
own. But Gail never did that, and I think that's she did.
So respectful. She has a very careful, light hand. She doesn't buy a book unless she loves a book. I mean, I'd been through a lot of drafts, and the person who, probably was my biggest editor was my very own husband, who is an editor.
No way. I didn't.
Yeah, way.
That's great. What is he? Tell
Way.
us. What does he edit? Is he?
Well, he's written two books. He wrote two books with Phil Jackson, Sacred Hoops and 11 Rings.
Wow.
He worked at Sports Illustrated. He worked at People. He was the editor of Utne Reader for a while, and then he was at AARP for 13 years. I was like an editorial army wife. I would go to all these different places with him, and always being a freelancer. Uh,
Yep.
so yeah,
That's great.
yeah, Hugh Delahanty would be his name.
That is
Um,
wonderful. I actually can't wait to meet him at some point because he obviously did a great job, and so did Gail. Um, we have time for a few more questions. I'm going to take some questions from the audience here. I tread lightly on this question, but it's one that I think you and I talked about, and I think it's an important one. I was wondering, can we talk a little bit about being a debut novelist? Um, you know, as a person of a certain age, because when we think of debut novelists, sort of the traditional mold that we all try to break out of, and the thing that also holds us back is
They're
that
all 23 and they just graduated from an MFA program.
exactly, and that's not you. You've come from sort of a non-traditional background to come to this place, and here you are with your debut novel, and it's everywhere now. So, like, let's talk about this. Is this? I mean, it's obviously it seems to me very rare. Um,
Uh,
how did you stick with it after
I
all these
think
years?
about Harriet Dorr, Stones for Ibarra. A friend of mine was in the Stegner Writing Fellowship program with Harriet Dorr at Stanford,
Very nice.
and she he talks about how she brought her book in and read it, and she was unsure, and he said they were all like dropping their jaws listening to it because it was so amazing.
Yeah.
You know, we ripen at different times. There's no way to really gauge it. Do I wish I'd been a little bit younger when I sort of got onto this? It's fine. I didn't, but I don't know that I could have written this book the way I wrote it without everything that's come before it. So I'm having a great time. It's fun.
That's really
And I
fun.
can't wait to write another one.
I was going to say, it's sort of like, it's like past lives bring you to this life. It's past editorial lives that sort of brought you
Yeah,
to this point as a novelist. Are you sort of working on this next project? Do you have an idea for the next one?
I
Are you?
do. I do. It's in a very nascent form at the moment,
Oh, yeah.
but so I don't want to talk about it, but maybe I could say two words: murder and metaphysics. This seems
Oh,
it seems to be my weird, quirky arena.
no, it's great. I love it. It's wonderful. It's funny. I remember I've been working on my novel, and I've been working like years on this thing, and it finally came out, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm moving on to the next one. And I wound up writing for about 4.5, 5 months on this next novel. And it turned out to be basically an extension of my past novel because I couldn't let go of that life, that
I
story.
know,
But then
I
you have to let it
know.
go.
Don't
And
we all think about a sequel? Like, okay, what if Jonah, what could he do? And yeah,
it's totally,
I
but
don't, I don't think so.
no, I think you got to just cleanse your palate,
Yeah,
do something new.
yeah.
This is great. Okay. So past lives, past lives, past lives. What do you think you were in your past life?
In my past life, well, I had that sort of horrific Holocaust thing. So is it true? I don't know. Can't prove it. Um, I once worked at an art gallery in Philadelphia about a million years ago, and there was some wacky older lady who looked at me one day and said, I think you once were Nefertiti's daughter.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I'll take it. Maybe I didn't know Nefertiti had a daughter. I think what's interesting is that a lot of times when people talk about their past lives, they are Joan of Arc or, some very famous person. They're never like your working stiff or peasant.
Right. It's the guy who's, gets hit by a runaway horse, or, it's always something dramatic and
Very
theatrical.
dramatic.
Yeah, I know. I would think that I would have to say I'm probably one of the plebeians in history, it's
You
something.
think? I don't know.
I mean, I think
I
I'm
could
living my
see
best
you.
life right now.
I could see you, in a robes in Greece. I don't know.
I would probably be like, I'd be the lunatic running around in robes going, and people are like, who's that guy? Get this guy out of here. That's got to be it. So let's see here if we have any questions, and you and I can obviously keep on going here, but let's see if we have any. Let me pull this up here. Boo, boo, boo. Okay, not here. Let's see if I check the chats. All right. So I don't see a ton of questions unless I'm totally missing them. Let me see. I'm just scrolling through here. Well, if you have any questions, guys, open it up. Go to the Q&A and ask some
Yeah,
questions.
please.
And you and I can obviously keep on going because,
Yeah.
I keep on thinking there was a film by Kenneth Branagh back in the early 90s called
Dead again.
Dead Again. And I remember my mom was really into the past life, well, her was past life regression and hypnosis and things like that. But I think, there's something wonderful about it. And even if you don't believe in past lives, what it can do is if you are a fiction writer, it can allow you to sort of put yourself into the heads of somebody in the past, and it helps us become great historical fiction authors. There's actually a practical application to sort of like looking at history in a tangible way. If you can in some
Yeah.
way, shape, or form even consider, well, maybe I was a part of it in some way.
And one thing that I think any spiritual teacher, and probably Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker, who's his successor, I don't think anybody would say that, you come back, you reconstitute as yourself.
Yeah.
So I heard somebody who is a spiritual teacher who I like very much, named Rupert Spira, talk about reincarnation as if So imagine a whirlpool or an eddy in a stream. And so the stream localizes in this eddy for a time, but then things shift and it breaks up. And so, and then the water just flows until at another point it localizes somewhere else. So there's some essence, some, but it's not, going from being Lee 1 to Lee 2. You don't schlep your, last life around and show up as you. I think it's much more on a much more
Basic
smaller
level, right? A basic sort of,
level.
right. The
Right.
essence of who we are, sort of, we go down to our more basic base particles and move on and sort of,
Yeah, it's particles. It's particles of consciousness.
it's a beautiful way to look at it. We've got some questions coming in here. Okay, so Hugh asks,
That would be my husband.
oh, Hugh, you're not allowed to ask. Why don't you just come into the room? Come on.
He's downstairs.
He's downstairs. Hugh, could you talk about your relationship with your characters and how they often steered you in the right direction when you were stuck? So the way that they were sort of talking to you, how did that happen?
Magic. I'm sure you know this from your own novel.
Yeah.
There would just be times when I had no idea what would happen next. I worked some from outlines, but the outlines are always, the characters would take over, and then I would get stuck and I would stand up, I would go for a walk, I would take hot showers. I found the water in the shower to be extremely conducive to intuitive
Yeah.
thinking. I don't know. Anyway, and then somehow the characters would tell me what to do next when I didn't know.
I think it's a wonderful thing that when that happens, and I sometimes wonder to myself, because a lot of my writer friends have said the same thing about the shower being sort of
Really?
the temple where the voices come to us. And I wonder, like, how many great novels in the world have come
I
about
don't
because of the
know.
invention of the shower.
I mean, it's terrible that we're in a drought. I feel apologetic to the water, and I feel apologetic to the forest's worth of trees that I went through writing this book.
And yet, look what you got that's come from it. I'm sorry, I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to let you apologize. You can apologize if you want. I'm saying it was for it. It is wonderful. The
Yeah.
novel is so wonderful and rich. Thank God you wasted all that. Or I don't think you're even wasting water. I think you're using water in the creation of
I
this.
don't know what it is about the water. It's weird, isn't it?
I
That
love
it's
it.
just
It's great.
it really works.
So we got more questions coming here. This is from Catherine Wolf. As a freelance writer, I imagine you were fairly deadline driven. What was your driver in your routine when you're working on the novel or even a memoir?
Um, my own compulsion. Um, m- uh, this novel was something I had to write. It wasn't even like it was a choice. I'd put it away for years at a time. We moved across the country for all these different jobs. I would put it away but it was always there. And so it just took a very long time. I have to show you. Okay, I brought this. I have this cartoon. It's been on, you can see how tarnished it is. This has been on my desk the entire time I've been writing the book. So the doctor says to the patient, I'm afraid that novel in you has got to come out. That's what this was like. I mean,
That from
truly,
Parade Magazine? Is that a Parade Magazine one?
no, it's an old New Yorker
I'm just kidding.
from, yeah, from forever ago. And it's how it was with this book. This book had to come out, and even when I tried to put it away, because it was also a little scary to write. It's scary to write about mothers and sons and scary things that happen. And I mean, it is primal. The process of writing was pretty primal.
Has your son read the book?
He has. He
What do you-
has, and he loves it. And very supportive, very supportive.
That's really
Yeah.
wonderful. We have a couple more questions that are coming in. Two from Lori. Um, how does the concept of eddies in the stream relate to karma? That's
Um,
I don't know if you can.
I don't know. Um, I don't know, but maybe whatever particles, whatever essence, flows from one eddy and then re-enters the stream and lands in another, that would also be the karma.
It's a good
I
question.
I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not an expert in it, in karma at all, so I don't know if I could even answer that one. But I don't know. It's interesting. We talked about psychotherapy and psychology. There's a huge part of. I would call myself an existentialist, like a pure existentialist. It doesn't. I don't. I don't think that karma even enters the realm of sort of true existentialism, where there's no sort of right or wrong or overseer of the world. We just sort of go through and sort of move almost like eddies in a stream. That's how I don't know. That's sort of how I see it, though.
yeah. I mean, I think the stream is consciousness.
Yeah.
And the eddies localize within the consciousness and then move on. It sort of makes sense to me. It also makes sense to me that children who have these memories, and the memories are mostly traumatic memories, it makes sense that, and they exhibit signs of PTSD, that they would be more likely to have had some violent remembrance than somebody who's 95 and kind of slips off peacefully in the night, would probably carry less residue. I mean, to me, it just seems logical, if any of this can be considered logical.
Well, it's maybe it's I think that there's some logic within that. It's a beautiful way to think about it. It really is. It means that no matter what, we're always sort of there's always sort of I don't know if consequences is the right way to think about it, but there's rhyme and reason in some way, shape, or form.
And it brings me back to how we live now, and living now with respect for one another and the planet.
God, we need that more than ever these days. One last question from the crowd here. Any chances for this fascinating story being made into a film? Have you heard anything about that?
Stay tuned.
Yeah, that's what I always say too.
It would be lovely. I think it lends itself to um, a film or something, but these things happen in their own time.
They do, and it is incredibly cinematic. There's just to go back to the book, it is a thriller. There is some very frightening moments, and it's not just about past lives and past life regression or what Jonah knows. Really, it's really also about loss. It's about death. It's about I mean, it really is a traditional thriller, just told in a very unique sort of way, almost through the eyes of the mothers. I think it was so masterfully done.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
it is my pleasure. So where are you off to next? Where's your next?
Book Passage. Gonna do Book Passage on Sunday at 4 o'clock with talking to Sylvia Boorstein, who's a Buddhist meditation teacher. And the Buddhists are all divided about reincarnation. The Tibetans, way for it. The Vipassanas don't have much truck with it. Zen really kind of doesn't deal with it. And I actually deal with the different streams in the novel, having been a practicing Buddhist meditation for a long time. So Book Passage, and then I'm going to, Hugh's coming with me. We're going to the East Coast. We're going to
Politics and prose.
we're going to DC, and I'm doing a few online Zooms there, and then an event with Ari Shapiro, who's the host of All Things Considered and a very dear friend, and someone I've known a long time and watched him kind of, he lived with us when he was Nina Totenberg's intern at NPR.
Wow.
So that will be a lot of fun. And then New York, I'm going to do a thing that I just learned about called Scribblers on the Roof. It's at a synagogue on the Upper West Side. And then to Woodstock, where I'm going to do an in-person event with Abigail Thomas, who's a very, very funny writer and fun, and doing a bunch of Zoom things all along the way.
You know, this is sort of the future of book touring. It's sort of a mixed match, right?
It
Zoom in
is.
person, Zoom in person.
And then I'm
I
coming
love
back and doing 3 more events at independent bookstores here, one at Great Good Place for Books
it.
in
They're
Oakland.
wonderful.
I think you went there,
Yeah, they're great.
Sylvia P., and then Sausalito Books by the Bay and Bookshop West Portal, and you went there too, right?
I did. I'm telling you, like
Yeah,
we
I'm
have a whole
following you,
conversation.
Lee.
I love it. We could talk about these forever. You have to get a t-shirt. You have to get the t-shirts.
Okay, I want the t-shirts.
I'm telling you, you got to carry these t-shirts around. It's wonderful. The independent booksellers are one of my absolute favorite things about working with them.
I know.
That they are, unlike the big box stores, which are also really wonderful. Independent booksellers actually sort of curate their own lists.
Well, they actually read books and know about them.
It makes a big difference, right? It's wonderful. You can walk into a store and they can talk to you not just about the book, but about the author. They are an author's best friend.
Yeah.
And so doing this, I know, again, I come from the publicity side when I did this, the publishing side professionally, not the writing side professionally, but a lot of writers sort of go, the book tours, it's a slog, it's fun, but it's a lot of work. It is absolutely one of the best things in the world.
It's a joy. It's
It's fun.
really after you're sort of holed up in your room forever and writing draft after draft, and you wrote 11, right?
I wrote 11 drafts.
And I'm just going to hold this up. This is Lee's
Oh, thank
book,
you.
The Last Confessions of Sylvia P. This is a beautiful book. I
Thank
highly,
you.
highly recommend it. And you could buy it from Copperfields. Just
Please
saying.
do. Please do.
Just
But today
saying.
we're here for your book, but thank you. I really appreciate it. But I tell you, I think, Copperfields, everybody, all these independent book sellers are wonderful. Please say hi to all of them for me.
I will. I
And,
will. I will.
and every
Yeah.
time, and anybody who's listening, anytime that you see what Jonah knew on in the bookstores, bring it up to the bookseller and tell them to put it on the front shelf if they haven't done it already.
Right. Exactly.
Good.
Good advice.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're heading it over back to Copperfields.
Yeah.
That was such a fantastic conversation. I'm sure everyone out there enjoyed it just as much as me. Thank you both for being with us tonight. And for those wondering, yes, this is being recorded. Everyone will receive an email tomorrow. It'll have the link to the recording, discount codes, books by both authors, and everything you need. So hopefully in the near future, we'll have you back in person.
I would love that. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Copperfields. This was my first sort of public event, so lovely to do it with you. Thank you.
You did it. Congratulations. Now you're off and running.
All right. Well, everyone have a great evening and bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.